in the chat. So who am I? I was a LEND fellow at the University of Rochester, as you said. I know there's a lot of acronyms, but they really are way too long. AUCD Emerging Leader. I was recently inducted into the Susan M. Daniels Disability Mentoring Hall of Fame from the National Disability Mentoring Coalition for their 2020 class. I was also recently inducted into Rochester Institute of Technology Distinguished Alumni Awardee class. So for the School of Individualized Study. And I was really happy and honored to, so early in my career, to be inducted into, such a distinguished group of people. I've also, I'm a cat mom. You will see the cats. Hopefully one of them will behave and not close the computer during the Zoom. Things happen. They do what they do. I'm also a published author. So I'm writing for the New York Times, Yes Magazine. I've had several scientific papers published. So all of this, including the fact that I have been disabled for 36 years, Memorial Day weekend this year, gives me some cred to be able to talk about this. So hopefully, that really helps you understand like different perspectives that I'm coming from. It's not just a disability lens, but also the lived experience as a Black person. So if JD or Sabrina, if you don't mind looking at the chat for me, that would be great. If anyone has it.
I'm watching it.
So like, what is intersectionality? Like, what are we doing? Why are we talking about this? Seems to really be like a hot button these days, and really kind of taking a moment back to think about like, this is not new. Like, intersectionality has been a term that was really coined and popularized by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. So I was born in 83, 89, it's been around for a minute. And most people think it is, like you say, like for myself, I'm Black, I am disabled, I am femme presenting, I'm queer, these things. But what intersectionality really is, it refers to the isms, racism and sexism that impact Black women and femmes. Kimberly Crenshaw was really talking from the perspective of a Black woman. And so oftentimes people do the identity and not the isms. And I want us to kind of move towards the isms, not only just how it impacts us, but how oftentimes we will wield these isms in the workplace, in our personal relationships, all the time. And oftentimes we're complicit in, these types of things. So intersectionality really kind of helps us identify kind of the root of what is going on and how that is manifesting, in the workplace, in your equity initiatives, and just how you're moving around in life. But often when we talk about these different isms, ableism is left out, right? We often like to separate people, like I'm Black on a Monday, I'm disabled on a Wednesday, and I'm queer on Friday because we like to party, right? But I'm all of these things 24/7. And so it's important to really think about how we're always bringing ourselves with us throughout the days, weeks, months, etc. And ableism, which is really talking about how building structures, infrastructure, how you kind of think, feel, and be is often defaulted to non-disabled people as being the standard and the norm. So for example, I'm pretty sure a lot of you live in a home that you bought, and that when you bought that home, most of you weren't really thinking about how you would navigate that if you used a wheelchair. And that you probably also didn't know that for some of you, if you've got the attached garage, there's a step that goes into the house, or a few steps that goes into the house. There's no building code or anything like that that says that that has to be there. And even like the front steps to the door, there's no building codes that say that that needs to be a thing. And so if it doesn't actually need to be a thing, why is it there? Because non-disabled bodies are the default. And we see this in our institutions, how we move, service delivery, etc. So hopefully, like, give me like a thumbs up or a 1 in the chat if this is making sense to you. And if you don't have any questions, we can move on to the next slide. So why is this important? To understand intersectionality and these isms that impact individuals, of multiply marginalized individuals, we have to need to understand the unseen impacts of internalized racial oppression. Now, internalized racial oppression has two forms: internalized racial superiority and inferiority, meaning that racism impacts those who are not white and those who are white in different ways. And nobody is immune to the impacts of racism. Internalized racial superiority often manifests in the workplace of things like having to control the narrative. Oh, wait a minute, this initiative is too much. We can't do that. You're being, you have to give it to people, slowly so that they understand and not get offended. Controlling the comfort of those who might not want to do this work, or saying we have to go at a slower pace because it protects the feelings, we don't want to alienate them, which is another way to control how things are done in the workplace. And that's just one example. When we think about internalized racial oppression for those who are not white, an example would be, oh, hey, I'm feeling some imposter syndrome. I might be a little bit too much for folk. Let me tone myself down. Let me not speak truth to power in this room, because every single time that I do, I get silence, or, oh, that's a good idea. And then nobody really follows through on what it is that I've said. And this can impact your policies, practices, procedures, and relationships. Oftentimes in equity initiatives, I see this a lot, is that people only want window dressing. When if we want equity and justice, we have to be willing to tear up the carpet and see the nastiness underneath and clean it up. And that sometimes that nastiness comes from us, right? Nobody here is perfect. So we have to understand our own complicitness within these systems, how we interact with each other, and how we can just do better. And this is also critical because I lead with the principles of disability justice. Now, the principles of disability justice were developed by this really amazing arts group called Sins Invalid. And Sins Invalid is Black and brown, queer, disabled individuals who kind of use art as a way to push political messages. And what many of the members noticed was that the disability rights movement was a white-centered, white-led movement. So majority of the pictures that you see about, oh, we're gonna crawl up the steps of the Capitol Hill to pass the ADA, et cetera, predominantly white images. And that Black disabled individuals who were there, who were actually leaders and organizers, their stories, their names have been left out. Furthermore, the disability rights movement really centers around using legislation as a means to gain rights. So you can litigate. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act. Well, you can just sue in order to get what it is that you need and your rights heard. However, litigation, the so-called justice system, right, is not an equitable system. And not all people have access to lawyers, et cetera, or even would be even listened to within the justice system. So for example, in the before times, which is what I call the time before the Rona, 70% of reasonable accommodations for remote work that went into litigation were ruled in favor of the employer, meaning that the court said, yes, remote work for your disabled workers was an undue burden and you just can't do it. And yet, as soon as coronavirus hits and we have this lockdown, magically everyone is able to do this. And this also happened to many disabled students who were going to, universities like the University of Rochester, and really wanting to have remote access into their classroom. And we're told that they couldn't have this. And many were ostracized. There were so many stories of disabled students saying that just a month prior, they had to quit school because no one would give them remote access. And yet that conversation was just left out. Everyone's talking about, oh, how great these professors are, but those same professors were the ones who denied access to disabled students and were supported by their associated universities and institutions. So in disability justice, we kind of recognize that, hey, there's different ways of being. There's different types of bodies involved. Not everyone has a mobility issue. Not everyone has access to a lawyer or even can access systems of power like the legal system in order to create change. So those who were involved in creating what's called like the second wave of disability justice said that, we needed some more guiding principles to frame the how to move forward that was inclusive of all different types of organizing, all different types of bodies, all different types of people. Now, intersectionality is one principle of disability justice. Another one that actually builds on that is called recognizing wholeness. Like I said before, we are not separate pieces and beings, right? But yet, for many multiply marginalized people, they can't bring their whole selves to work. They can't bring their whole selves into many predominantly white environments. Or even if they do, they're looked at funny. There's like a joke, but some of it is true that if you get 3 Black people talking in the hallway at a predominantly white organization, the white folk will look, what's going on? What are they doing? It's like a big comedy skit that ends up happening in the show Insecure. I love that bit. So when we're thinking about recognizing wholeness, how is that whole individual being supported in the organization? What does that look like? Is there understanding? Are we always having your Black and brown coworkers being the one to explain things to you? When I saw in the chat, many of y'all got degrees, more degrees than I do. I only got a bachelor's degree. And so you have to do a lot of that work in education on yourselves to be able to understand what is going on. And this goes to being a Jedi. I'm a nerd, so I like this acronym. B is for belonging. The A is for accessibility. J is for justice. E is for equity. D is for diversity. And I is for inclusion. You can't be a Jedi without recognizing the wholeness of yourself and the others around you in the workspace. And your equity initiative will always fail if you're not taking into account intersectionality, as well as recognizing the wholeness of your employees, your colleagues, your coworkers, the people that you serve, etc. That's huge, right? They're not just numbers on the page. And teach people how to see the humanity behind the data point. Every single data point that you have, that's a person with a whole life. And most of the life ain't got nothing to do with you. And your life has nothing to do with them. And yet here you are sharing this space together. So what does it look like from a service delivery point of view to be able to see them as whole human beings who have sometimes limited choices? and how your delivery of service can impact them in very real and meaningful ways. That was my alarm. Thank you, Luna. So I'm going to keep moving. So this presentation is short because I want to have a lot of time for questions, but I really want to talk about putting things into action, because a lot of times we sit in the presentation and be like, I learned a thing. And then you put the notebook away and you go about your lives and nothing really changes, right? So I tell people that the first system that needs to change is you. Understanding intersectionality and its impacts, the isms, their impacts on individuals and yourself, you have to have a deep understanding of that. I told someone the other day that equity work is like multiple things packaged into one. It's behavioral change, it is process improvement, it is change management, it's project management. And if you don't have a therapist, you probably should, because there's a lot of therapy is involved. So that's like the first thing, is you have to really see this in not a one-dimensional way, but a multi-dimensional way. Secondly, you need to read the work by marginalized folk and actually implement what has been said. A lot of the times we're still dealing with the same thing that Malcolm X, bless his soul, we're still talking about the same things that he was dealing with. We're still talking about the same things that Dr. King was dealing with. So if we're still talking about it and not much change has been done, then we really need to examine ourselves and ask ourselves the real reason why. And oftentimes it's a lack of willingness to accept change, and that we are the ones who are responsible for that change. And that change is dirty, it's messy, it's hard, it's tiring, but 100% necessary. We can't just be bringing marginalized folk to the table. Oh, we want a seat at the table. Nah, you have to actually listen and do what is being asked of you in that moment. Otherwise, it's just window dressing and just are trying to put lipstick on a pig. And as part of that work, you have to work on your own internalized racial oppression. Everyone has it. And it is a lifelong work to undo that. And particularly for white folk, y'all are behind the curve, right? I've got the experience of hundreds of years of individuals who were activists and advocates and leaders, right? Who were fighting for change. It's new still, because there's not been that long arc of just hard, dogged work of creating change. And that often the change that white people have traditionally embarked on was that you're going to go help the Black and brown people over here, and never about how you're going to save yourselves. Because like I said before, everyone is in the same soup. No one is separate. And that most people don't recognize, especially those who are white, they don't recognize that they too are the ones that are drowning. And there's not a lot of tools and models to help you get out of that. So you need to be putting yourself in situations where you're constantly interrogating yourself in like a good way, not like, this is not like CSI, like tell me who the killer was, right? That's not what I'm talking about. But really that critical thinking and constant examination of like, where and why is this coming from? Where is this behavior going? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? So that's huge. And so if you haven't really gone through that process and just think, I'm woke, I got a Lives Matter sign, or Gucci, then that is actually not the case. And there's always that opportunity for growth and change. I know that's a lot, right? This is just the life that we live in, right? And so in order to help do that, I'm gonna do some shameless plugs because that's me. I'm here. Why not? So I have a 30-day guided journal that talks about developing, and cultivating your intersectional mindset. And there is a link to purchase that. And also I do continuing education in my email list to bring different tools, speakers, etc. So really thinking about, I'm not the only person who has, a marginalized lived experience. You need to hear it from different individuals and then ask yourself, how are you implementing that in the work that you do? So now it's time for my favorite part, the talking bit. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and feelings. And I can see you, so if you want to raise the little blue hand, that is also good.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, one of the hardest things, like I'm familiar a little bit with some of the work, from doing it myself, and also familiar with ableism and ageism through lived experience with myself and loved ones. So that opened my eyes to realize that there are certain things that I don't understand that I'll like for instance, let me rephrase it. The door for me is recognizing that there's certain things I'll never get because I'm not in that person's shoes. I can have compassion. For instance, we men are never going to know exactly the feeling that women have of having to look around their shoulders and be safe all the time. We could have compassion. We might have an experience, but we have to start at that place of recognizing our own ignorance, and then, like you say, being willing to do the work. Okay, so then one of the challenges for me, as far as talking with other people about that, a lot of people don't want, they're threatened by examining themselves. They think that to examine yourself means that you just want to make them politically correct and all that business, or you want to oppress them, which makes me absolutely crazy. I've seen people say that CRT is racist. It's like, oh, please. It's a device that's used to help us examine ourselves. But do you have any tips for um, those certain people just seem to be closed to these discussions, and that I don't know what to I don't know what to do about that. Like I've practiced digging in, and even as a professional, being willing to interrogate, how do I do my work, I being willing to take constructive criticism. And there was a teacher that I knew that was an experienced teacher that videotaped herself. After 20 years experience, she caught herself rolling her eyes. So even for people that are, when you do a lot of this kind of work, she was rolling her eyes at a certain student. She was appalled, but she would never have caught herself if she wasn't engaged in that work that makes us vulnerable. It's scary. Um, so what's your tips on inviting people into that scary process? And have
So
you had any success with that?
I had a lot of success, but it all starts with relationships.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think relationships are very difficult in my experience
yeah,
working with white folk.
yeah.
White folk have difficulties building genuine, deep relationships.
Hmm.
And that is a function of racism. Because a lot of the times you're taught, oh, there's certain things you just don't talk about, right?
Hmm.
Everybody knows what those are: religion, politics, all these things. Oh, we don't do that. Or oftentimes they're very conflict avoidant, which is
Yeah,
of racism. We're not going to talk about the thing that's literally right in front of us.
yeah,
And there's also the stigma around mental health, right? That therapists, you're crazy, there's something wrong with you, and that's why, you need X, Y, and Z. And, for Black folk, it's that, the whole mental health field has had a long-standing history of racism. But let's just put that aside and just talk about the white folk for now. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to get through multiple layers of stuff
Mm-hmm.
before you're even able to have a genuine conversation with people. And what
Yeah.
often the mistake that white people make is that they see someone else maybe saying something out of pocket or whatever, and then just want to go in, rah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody I will tell, nobody likes that.
Yeah.
Nobody. I don't care who you are. You wouldn't like it if someone did it to you. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. Why are you coming at me like this? Or often, like I saw in a group recently, um, there was a lot, it's a disabled group for those with spinal cord injuries. And there are many people posting, pictures of them with their guns, hunting or whatever. And then you had those who were more kind of like liberal white people going like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is racist or whatever. And I'm just sitting there going like, one, let the people hunt.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
let the people hunt. If they got 50 guns, right? Who are you to come in and just try to like put a label on someone without understanding what their perspective is, where they're going, why they're doing this, and is this even the appropriate time to broach that subject? Because sometimes it's just not. So you've got to learn multiple levels of how to discern when is the appropriate time and place to confront somebody. You also have to understand that you've got to build relationships,
Yeah.
and that some people, they just ain't going to hear it. And that's okay too. But how are you building relationships with individuals? How are you leading them into this conversation? And then what is it? What's your goal? Because sometimes, is it just to advocate? Is it just to you actually want, to build coalition with people? Like, I need your help and I want to bring you in.
Yeah.
What is your reasoning, for anyone in this way?
I found that
If all that makes sense.
yeah, like the principles of motivational interviewing help, like you're not confrontational and just reflecting. It's like without having an agenda. Like I have more patience with people. Like I work with people with difficult mental illness, and I have more patience with the people that are way out and that would be thrown away than somebody who thinks they have it all together. And it just, to me, it just seems stubborn. But I know there's more layers to it. But one of the things that, for myself, I can reflect, but also catch myself, make sure I'm reflecting and really don't have an agenda. It's like, well, you mean such and such when you're saying this, and then they adjust it, and then you reflect again, and then, but in the minute I know, in the minute I get the agenda, then my judgment gets clouded, and I want to throttle them, and that's not good, you
Right.
know. Um, but well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. I'm seeing, if you help me out, there's like a lot of comments in the chat.
There's two questions in the chat. So one of them being, are there no accessibility policies on how to build houses and roads or sidewalks?
So housing is separate. Housing, I think it's like the fair housing, something, something. So that has a separate set of guidelines, et cetera. In New York State, there is a law called the visitability, which was recently passed. And that says that for any building that is 2 stories or more, like apartment buildings for housing, that there has to be a no-step entrance, an elevator. But universal design has been around for I don't know how long. I think the 80s, 70s, 80s. And it's just not been adopted as a way to build housing at all. So like less than 1% of housing in the United States is actually accessible for those with mobility disabilities. Good luck if you're deaf and you need accommodations and things like that. So that's separate. For roads, all of that is covered underneath the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Can you talk a little bit more about universal design for those who don't understand what that might be in the room?
Yeah, for universal design, what this means is a a way of building where the structure already has what it needs in order to be accessible built into it. So there's extra studs in the walls, especially in the bathroom, so that you could put grab bars for people to install if they needed it. It means wider doorways, maybe higher ceilings, maybe, you know, light switches that are kind of lower, but also that are like flat so that you can just punch it and be able to use that. For houses, it would mean that you would have a bathroom and a room that could be converted into a bedroom located on the first floor. So could someone actually live a whole life on the first floor with a no step entry? Minimum one, but I always say there should be two because I'm paranoid and I've had people die in fires because they couldn't get to the accessible exit. And so at least one accessible exit in the home. So it's a way to build that really kind of looks like the luxury lofts. Like I'm in, you know, a luxury apartment. And so people like wider doors, open spaces, you know, like that is a thing that people like, but it's not universally adopted by architects, builders. And really it's to help you age in place. Right? People want to buy a home and they, you know, I have friends buying a home, we're gonna live here until they're old, but the stairs are nearly vertical. I was like, how? You're 38 and you're already complaining about your knees, you know, 20, 30 years from now, you're not going to be able to climb them stairs, right? So how do we keep people in their homes and age in place? Also, folk like ourselves, we want to live too.
The other question.
Was there another one?
Yeah, there's one more. Do you have tools on how providers may be able to accommodate other identity issues such as gender / non-binary in our training and tools?
I mean, yeah, you got to read from those authors. I know I sound like facetious, but like it's really that simple. There is a whole host of tools, resources, talks, etc., by the LGBTQ community. And so you have to just be really intentional in seeking those out, particularly from those who are Black, Latina, Latinx, who have put that material out there. So there's tons of resources. So sometimes Google really is your friend. And then inviting them, you know, to come speak, you know, pay them to come speak and say, this is what we found, right? We need your help implementing it because sometimes it don't got to be you. Hire someone to help you implement those processes and do that review. Any other questions? I hope that was helpful.
I have a question.
Sure.
So this is Nikisha. So I've worked in the disability realm for close to 25 years. And when you speak to disability as white, can you expand on that? Because what we see in the service sector is that, especially in the OPW realm, there's an eligibility process. So once you go through that front door process, you have the same access to all of the services through OPW. But there tends to be, or to some degree, lack of participation by Black and Brown people. And do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, so on two fronts. One, that organizations that serve disabled people are predominantly white, and this is across the nation. Here in Rochester, I can only think of one organization that's Black-led that actually intentionally has in its mission to serve disabled people. Everybody else is white. Not only is it in their board structure, white folk, their employee structure, white folk, and predominantly not disabled on their boards, their employees, et cetera, which for me, I'm a business owner. And I look at other business owners funny if they say that it's their mission that we do great service and we're developing leaders, et cetera, but none of those folk you're hiring in your business. So I don't have that level of confidence, right? And so as a business owner, it behooves me, if my mission is about equity, then you better believe that every employee, every contract, policy, et cetera, is going to lead with that mission in mind. So from service providers, there really has to be some sort of change, but also the attitude of many service providers is to, oh, we're helping these poor disabled folk over here, and how they're talked about, even just the paperwork process where you got to spill everything just to get the basics, or sometimes, oh, so-and-so needs help, right? And that's seen as a detriment, but all y'all probably are in a relationship, right? You getting help from your spouse, your kids, your families, that's seen as normal, right? That's not seen as normal for disabled individuals. On the flip side, when we talk about who gets access to services and who takes up services, they are often middle class, white families who are doing this. Part of that is because most service agencies aren't co-located in neighborhoods where they serve. So I wrote a paper, and the city of Rochester has the highest concentration of disabled people. And yet you'll find most of the service agencies, Elmwood, East Ave, in the suburbs. And that's not feasible for, Black and brown folk living out on Dewey to come see you and access your services. And they probably don't even know that you exist in the first place. So there needs to be a different shift of stop having people come to the service provider and the service providers actually coming to the people. Another reason is because the paperwork process, I've tried 3 times. I have a college education. I am a scientist. I am pretty doggone smart if I don't say so myself. Let me pat myself on the back. I have tried 3 times to get on Medicaid buy-in program and got denied 3 times for the Medicaid buy-in program. Make it make sense. If the process is so laborious and intensive, and you've got Black and brown folk working 2-3 jobs, and the average Rochester, education level, right? And the reading level is a 4th grade reading level, but you're requiring paperwork after paperwork after paperwork, phone call after phone call after phone call. Ain't nobody got time. They literally do not have time for that. And so usually with Black and brown families, we just make do. We're going to take care of Pookie, right? But oftentimes, if they can't take care of Pookie, instead of getting, services, et cetera, Pookie gets put in a nursing home. Because at least 3 squares in a nursing home is better than what you were getting in the hood. And it's not, it's a death sentence. So we really need to think about how we're actually just working with people. And the paperwork process, it gotta go.
Not to steal any of your thunder, because this is your show, but also the language. There's a huge language barrier, especially particularly in our city, right? So we live in a sanctuary city, meaning that we have dozens of languages spoken in our city. And if you happen to be Black or brown and you also need services and you also don't speak English, then that right there within itself is a barrier. And that creates a huge stop, not there. It's bigger than a barrier. It's just a stop where people don't get the services that they need. And because the state and the government continue to change the way the services work, continue the way the services are dispersed, I should say, not how they work, because how they work, we know, but how they're dispersed, we know that it keeps changing. If you don't speak English, if you don't have a consistent translator with you, then what? What happens? And so how can you continue to follow up with the process if you struggle to even get to the front door? If you struggle to even get that initial paperwork started? And so we need to look at how exactly are we delivering services? What are we really taking? So Luticha mentioned earlier, we don't want people to come here in buckets. We want people to come here whole. So if someone comes to you not speaking English and they speak Spanish or they speak Swahili or they speak whatever it is, you know, what great lengths are you as an organization or you as a person going to find the people that they need to make this work? Right. So it's not just you finding a translator, it's you finding someone who is invested in the process, that isn't just going to translate, that is going to explain exactly what's happening. Because I could fill out paperwork. Am I going to do it right? I don't know, but I can fill it out. Now, did I explain this in Spanish all the way right? No, I said, okay, we're going to turn this paper in and we're going to hope somebody calls us back. We're not going to call anybody because I don't know who you have at home that can answer the phone if they do call you back. And so you're just hoping. It's like winning the lotto. I keep saying this to folks. When you're disabled, especially in the city, I can't speak for a lot of other places. It's like winning the lotto when things really work out for you, right? Oh, you got the grant to put the ramp in front of your house, you won the lotto. Oh, you found a bathroom within 5 minutes, you won the lotto. Oh, you got a service that everyone in the city is already receiving, but you just figured it out, you won the lotto. So we have people who don't have OPWDD waivers, who don't speak English, but need them, right? We have kids in the city school district currently who could be benefiting from self-direction, who could be benefiting from family reimbursement, but they don't have it. They're dependent on the church, who is, just luckily has a van that is broke down, but it works and can get this kid from point A to point B. So we're having these other unorthodox systems kind of in place to make it work so that they can be their whole selves, to just get a better life or a better quality of life. And so that's something that we really need to acknowledge, that language is also a huge barrier when we're talking about intersectionality and we're talking about the services that exist. I'm sorry for being long-winded. There is one more question though.
But let me kind of riff off that, because you know how much I love you. Is that, not only do you not access the services, but when you do, the services put you in this box, this little box. And God forbid you grow, you change, right? You might need something else or if you need something that's outside of the box. Now, I have hesitations getting on Medicaid because Medicaid has asset seizure. I'm a business owner. I want my assets to be passed down to the next generation, right? If I want a home and on a home, Medicaid can take my home. There are real legal barriers that people might not want to mess with, right? Because who said, none of your insurance companies are like, well, we paid all this money into you, right? And we took care of you in 1992, when you had a broken leg, doing whatever. So we're going to take your home to recoup our loss. Nobody has to go through that other than disabled people on Medicaid. So you really have to think about what this actually means. Do you have a good legal team to help people about education and actually putting it in place? Because I tell you, this process to protect my assets is expensive, right? And even finding a lawyer who understands this is expensive and tiring and time consuming. What boxes are you putting people in so that they can grow? If someone is 11 years old and then now is 18, 20, right? They're a whole different human being. But that stuff from when they were 11 follows them. Why? Nobody is judging you about what you did when you was 18 years old, probably messed up, didn't know who you were, what you were doing, and just getting into some mess, right? But that is something that we do constantly, especially to Black and Brown individuals. You also need to understand that how disability manifests and represents itself, particularly for those of us, like I have a traumatic brain injury, autism, all of these different things, especially mental health, is different in Black and Brown individuals, and how we describe it is also different. So oftentimes people aren't being captured because your forms, your processes, etc., aren't thinking about how this manifests in individuals who might be different than the standard white individual. So it's complex, right? And so how systems need to change is going to be dependent upon the individuals within those systems in order to advocate for that change. And there's no real partnership between service delivery folk and the advocates who are fighting for change. And that also has got to go, right? It's actually going to not cut your bottom line. It's only going to be more beneficial for you to be in partnership and comradeship with disabled individuals as we push for change.
So the next question, that was a lot, that was deep. The next question is, as it goes, is I work in vocational services with the DD population. Much of what we do revolves around expectations. How do you view the question of intersectionality based on an assumption of common expectations in a work environment? How might that translate to other isms?
I mean, what does common expectations even mean? Like, that's like the first thing. Oftentimes, when you're going into a work environment, there's what the employee handbook says, right? And what the real actually is. And oftentimes it's this subtle, unspoken kind of rules, right? Of what to do, not to do, how to be, etc. That those who are Black, brown, autistic, etc., like often bump right against those all the time. And so when you talk about common expectations, you have to explicitly state them. That's the first thing. If it's not explicitly stated, then what are we doing? And if the expectations aren't co-created, then what are we doing? And then if they're not reinforced equitably and equally, right? You can't have a certain set of expectations for one person and set of expectations over here for another. Or say like, these are what the expectations are, but we're gonna nitpick over here and not over here. I've seen that, I experienced it, you know, that was like a huge problem leading equity initiatives. This is what we say, the policy is good, the enforcement is where the problem was.
I think it's, again, this is not my show, but I think that when we're talking about other isms and we're talking about disability, I think that especially when you're Black or brown and you have all these other intersectionalities, or even if you just have other intersectionalities, it's in the workplace that what I have found as a woman with a disability, it's hard to avoid those other isms, right? Like, it's like the system is just built for you to somehow face them in some shape, way, or form. And so it's really about having a you moment, if you are that person in power, and checking yourself as to what you're putting out and the energy that you're putting out to your staff, to the people that you directly support, like, and what is it that you're doing, and how are you being supportive, or how are you not? What are you merely missing? And are you creating those lanes for clear communication where people can really say this and not be fearful that they're going to lose their job? Because all the time I say things and I'm like, oop, I'm going to get fired. I went too far that day. Like, you know, I never know when I was too Black at work. And so, like, those are real things, and those are real concerns that people have often. It's like, how much can I really share? So we're going to just take one more question. And so this is like a question / statement, I think. Maybe it's just a statement. Maybe it's not a question. Has anyone in this audience noted that the pretty poor training of the new care coordination agencies, I can't read, Prime Care and Life Plan in Syracuse, it is pretty obvious that they don't understand the service coordination skill that we used to have. Some of the workers seem barely literate, let alone trained to really understand what their job is. This is not to mention anything at all about cultural humility or intersectionality. And what I would say to that, Luticha, I don't know if you want to respond to the statement, but what I would say is that I've had 3 care coordinators during the pandemic. All of them just keep quitting. I just keep getting a new one. And so the relationship is really strained there. Because you keep having to explain who you are to these new people and hoping that they understand and hoping that you continue to receive the services that you are receiving, that there is no pause. So I again, this goes back, I blame the state. Like, why do you keep creating these new rules? changing everything up because there was a balance. Not to say that Medicaid service coordinators were the best, but they did what they had to do. They got their job done. And so changing all of that, and also not, you know, I don't think people stress enough cultural humility or intersectionality when you're talking about disabled people. So I don't know how care coordinators could really even see that if it's not something that's often talked about in their realm of work. I don't know.
You know, I always blame the state, like for one, because I've been on that other side. I've worked for government, and government employees do not get the level of training that they need, and it is not prioritized as something that is needed and necessary in order to foster good employees. Two, Medicaid workers, particularly the service care coordinators, have caseloads sometimes of 100. I've seen max 200 per one person that they got to deal with. You would never do that to a therapist. And if you did, that therapist would be like, yo, you're out of pocket, I'm leaving, right? So a high turnover rate is often because they're in a very poor work environment, very high stress work environment with no real level of training, and no one really gives the time in order to properly educate and train. But also on the application process, you know, you see it like you think it's just a certain, and then the reality is the job is much different. So the reality of the job versus what is said on the job specs are very two different things. So there's no alignment there. But what job and education really prepares you to be a service coordinator? What does that look like from an educational track, from the university system, all the way up to, you know, certifications, all of that. So they're really, really stuck between a rock and a hard place. And then you wonder why they rude a lot of the time, you know, because they don't got the time to deal with you and your complex issues and needs. They literally do not. And oftentimes don't really remember, because how can you remember a caseload when you're that stressed with deadlines, hidden rules and regulations, things that keep changing from people who do not understand Medicaid in the first place, right? And also have never even engaged workers of what are their frustrations and needs on the job. Like if I had my ideal kind of situation, I would bring in a whole bunch of process improvement folk into DSS, into the state, and just a long-term haul. And that's going to take at minimum 5 years, right? To really, really dig deep and change things. And so it's kind of that tension, that both and, right? You've got people with needs, you've got stress workers, you've got bad policies, no training, you know, and you wonder why it's a hot mess. It's never going to work.
So we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to thank everyone who has added something into the chat, but I don't want to read it because we won't have enough time to really respond to it in the way that it deserves. So thank you so much for your comments and your statements. I think that we will thank now Luticha. Thank you so much for opening us up during this series. Sabrina, could you please share that slide, please? Maybe not. Thank you. And I didn't mention this in the beginning, and I am so sorry because I was just really excited to just jump in, and I am definitely a millennial. Instant gratification is my jam, so I just wanted to jump right in. And so this is a series, Intersectionality, the People and Me. It's just a series of community conversations, and we will be having them for the next maybe 5 months. So this is just the first. Luticha's got us started. We actually might be having her back. We'd hope that you join us in the future. The next session is June 20th, if I'm not mistaken. Just let me double check. And during the next session, we will be tackling a disability and religion, which is always a hot topic. So June 30th at noon, we always expect these to be lunch and learns kind of situations. Please join us. Please sign up. We will be releasing more information about it soon. There is also a survey after this session. If you could please, we hope that you take it. Kind of tell us how we did. This is the first time for me and Sabrina to kind of tag team this kind of effort, this huge of a thing. again, thank you so much for being here. Luticha's information for contact will be shared on Starbridge's website. So please feel free to contact her if you have any other questions, if you're interested in the journal. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, y'all, and thanks for having me. This has been really great. And I am looking forward to the next one. Y'all should be there. It's an amazing, amazing topic that get the credit that it's due for how important it is. So thank you again.
Bye, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
Thank you. All right, so we're gonna just close. Luticha, you don't forget to